Corinthians, the 15th chapter, his first 11 verses of the chapter, as Paul writes to the church, now I would remind you, brothers and sisters, of the good news that I proclaimed to you, which you in turn received, in which you also stand, through which you are being saved, if you hold firmly to the message that I proclaimed to you, unless you have come to believe in vain. For I handed on to you as of first importance what I in turn had received, that Christ died for our sins in accordance with the Scriptures, and that he was buried, and that he was raised on the third day in accordance with the Scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas, then to the 12, and then he appeared to more than 500 brothers and sisters at one time, most of whom are still alive, though some have died. Then he appeared to James, and then to all the apostles, and last of all, as to one untimely born, he appeared also to me. For I am the least of the apostles, unfit to be called an apostle, because I persecuted the church of God. But by the grace of God I am what I am, and his grace toward me has not been in vain. On the contrary, I worked harder than any of them, though it was not I, but the grace of God that is with me. Whether then it was I or they, so we proclaim, and so you have come to believe. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Valentine's Day. I know this because I asked about it in Bible study. I sat there and said, when is Valentine's Day? And they looked at me and they, February 14th, it's the same every year. I don't know where my mind was at, but yeah, February 14th. It's also a sad anniversary, because it's also the 1-year anniversary of the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School shooting in Parkland, Florida. The kids had Valentines that they were going to hand out to one another that day. They was all excited about Valentine's Day at the high school. And then in tragedy, 17 students. Now, on March 14th of the same year, students around the country posed a walkout at their schools as part of the hashtag Enough movement, and a way of recognizing that violence in the schools this got stopped. It's just got stopped. Now, some of the students who did the walkout, they got suspended. And some of the students were joined by the teachers, and they went out and walked as well. Out in California, Rockland, California, one high school teacher chose this walkout as an opportunity to discuss about looking for the missing perspective, assessing arguments and the media coverage that was being received. And so she went to the administration of the school and said, would we be as forgiving of our students walking out if they were walking out over abortion? Now, that question kind of got misconstrued in the neighborhood, and she ended up being put on paid administrative leave for a while they sorted out what she asked them. Now, what I want to talk about, though, is not the results of what happened there in California, but that period of time, that paid administrative leave. Now we see this happen all the time, paid administrative leave. Coach Urban Meyer down in, over in Ohio State was put on paid administrative leave because he possibly had mishandled a question of domestic violence with one of his coaches. And oftentimes we see government workers put on paid administrative leave because of some misconduct, and while they do the investigation, they let these folks stay home, watch Netflix, go fishing, while they try to figure out whether or not that person had actually committed a wrongdoing. Now the woman in California, the school teacher, was only out for 2 days on paid administrative leave. But some people can go up to a year on paid administrative leave. And we as taxpayers will sit back and say, hey, wait a minute. I'm paying for them to be on vacation while they work out this situation. And the reason that they think that paid administrative leave is the best way to go is because they want to have they just don't want it to linger around. If you're paying for somebody not to work, you're going to address the issue. You just won't leave somebody hanging out there. So that's the thinking behind it. Now, one person who never got any such paid administrative leave was the guy who wrote our scriptures today, the Apostle Paul. This guy got no leave at all. At all. Paul was out there in the field from the time he was called till the time he was done. For Paul, his retirement plan kicked in when they hauled him out of that prison, took off his head. That's when Paul started his retirement plan. And Paul's saying to us, that's how it works for all of us. All of us. You know, when you look at Paul's description of himself as an apostle, I start to think, what if Bob Zillhaber says, you know, I'm going to replace the minister. Guys, I've got somebody. I've got like 50 candidates, and this is the worst one I got, but this is the one I'm bringing to you. He says he even admits he can't preach worth a lick. That he's probably the worst person out there for the job. And this is what Paul's saying about himself. I am the least among the apostles. This guy that I'm going to bring to you, man, he has badmouthed the church for years, but I'm going to bring him to your church. How's that sound? I can see the PPRC committee just losing their minds. Calling up the bishop. What are you doing? But this is where Paul calls about himself. He says when Jesus came, he presented himself. First to Cephas, and that's Peter, and this is an amazing part of it as well, because Peter was the apostle who denied him. And who does Jesus go to first? The one who turned his back on him. The one who said, I don't know you. And that's the one Jesus goes to first. And then he goes to the others. The rest of them. And then he presents himself to 500. Then he presents himself to James, his brother. And then finally, he appears to this Saul of Tarsus, breathing hot against the church, heading for Damascus with letters to arrest Christians and bring them back to be tried for blasphemy. That's what he's doing. And on that road to Damascus, Jesus, who had already ascended, comes back again to get Paul. You are going to be an apostle for me. You are going to carry this message to the Gentiles, not to your own Jewish groups. I'm going to send you out to the Gentiles. That's where you're going. And Paul lifted up that message. And Paul moved forward. And he does. He brings himself down, but if any guy should have gotten a break, if any guy should have got some leave time, it was Paul for the work that he put in for the church. Amen. But in Paul, there was no working 20 years and retire when you're 52. There was no working 30 years and getting out when you're 65 and getting some Social Security. There was none of that for Paul. For Paul, the challenge was to keep getting the message out there. If he was breathing, he was doing it. If he was crippled up, he was doing it. If he has gotten beaten, and he was beaten severely several times, he kept putting the message out there. And that is why we can trust the Gospels. What group of people would go out and take the beatings, and take the persecutions, and take the threat of sword and crosses and burnings, and never, ever come off the story unless it was true? Unless it was absolutely true. You won't die for a lie. These men died for the truth, so that we would be saved. We stand on their shoulders. And Paul points it all out as this. It comes by grace. It comes by grace. He says, I give you this good news. Christ died, Christ was buried, Christ rose again. That's your good news. That's his promise. And as he has revealed himself to others, God lavishes unmerited, merciful, and amazing grace. And without God's grace, as Paul says, there's no place, there's no ministry, there's nothing for it. There would be nothing for him. If anybody should have been stomped out by God, it was Paul. But God showed him grace. And he knows it. He writes, it is grace that saves us. Even though he doesn't feel qualified for the job, he knows that if he has grace, he can do the job. And all of us can feel that. Maybe you don't feel qualified to be called to share your message, to share your faith. But know that grace gives you that power. Grace gives you that power. You say, well, what? I'm just an average person. I live my life. I take care of my kids. I take care of my family. I go to work. I come home, play a couple rounds of golf maybe on the weekends, show up for church, help out with a soup sale or down at community ministries. There's nothing special about me, which is true. But in each of those avenues, you have the opportunity to show God's love and grace. In all those avenues, not everybody was called to stand up in front of a church and preach. But you are called to show kindness. You are called to show some caring. You are called to lift up a little bit of a helping hand when you have the opportunity. Where every single one was called to pray. And in all those avenues, as God's grace works upon us and through us, others can be saved and others can be lifted up and others can find their path as well to walk with God wherever they're at. Saul of Tarsus was found on a road to Damascus trying to destroy the church. That's why he considered himself the least of these. None of us have ever done that, for sure. I hope.
But all of us can be called as Paul was called, by grace. You are a place for God's grace to rest, to work, and to move. Let us share his love with others. In Jesus' name, amen. Our closing